Hi, my name is Liam Allen. I am proud to be presenting tonight at the Explorers Club, the Australia-New Zealand chapter. My presentation tonight is on the famous shipwreck Mars the Magnificent, and we'll be discussing the exploration and documentation of the wreck. So looking forward to a great presentation and delighted to be here. Thank you. Okay, good evening everyone, and thank you very much for coming out here tonight. It's a real honour to be able to come and present at the Explorers Club. Before I get started, I'd just like to thank Jane and Todd for organising tonight and for inviting me along. One other special mention I'd like to reach out to is David Strike, who was up here looking for your membership votes earlier. And David, I'd just like to acknowledge and thank you for everything that you've done for me and my career. You've been highly influential in that, and I greatly appreciate it. So I'd like to formally acknowledge that. Thank you. As you can probably tell, I've a bit of an Irish accent going on, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in a small little town in the centre of Ireland, and was lucky enough to get involved in scuba diving from a very young age. Okay. Yeah, and when I moved to Australia in 1997, a bit of reverb going on. When I moved out here in '97, one of my dreams was to go and dive to Barrier Reef, which I did, and from that point I realised that Australia was a country where I could make a career out of scuba diving, and have been very lucky to have been able to make a career out of it. And over the past few years, I've been very lucky to get involved in some pretty cool and amazing expeditions around the world. In particular, my love for scuba diving is wreck diving. It's something that I'm truly passionate about, and I can tell you that in confidence because if my wife was here, I'd have to tell you that I was truly passionate about her, but she's not here, so it's all good. But one of the projects I want to talk to you tonight about is a wreck called Mars the Magnificent. Before we get started, we'll just have a little bit of, as part of the presentation, we'll give you a little bit of a rundown about the Baltic Sea, which is where Mars is. And then we'll have a little bit of a history on Swedish maritime history. Is any Swedes in the room tonight? I apologise in advance, I'm very sorry. It won't be your finest moment, I apologise. No, I'm serious, love the Swedes. And then we'll go into a bit of detail about the shipwreck Mars, the history about the wreck, and then we'll have a bit of a dive around. I'll take you around the wreck with some pictures, and then we look at a video at the end, talk you through it. So the Baltic Sea is it's surrounded. It's a landlocked sea pretty much, surrounded on all sides. So it's bordering Sweden and Finland, Scandinavian countries, Russia and northern part of Europe. And over here in the corner, you can see that it opens out into the North Sea, just north of Denmark and south of Sweden. So as a result, because of its location, it plays a significant role in maritime trade, and still to this day it's a pretty significant and pretty important trade route, but has been for centuries. Because the Baltic is landlocked, it is not affected by groundswell, so they don't really get much groundswell up there, unlike what we're experiencing this evening. But because of its geographical location, the weather patterns that move through there are extremely aggressive, and the Baltic can turn from basically flat pond-like conditions into some of the most treacherous waterways you could be sailing in. So even when we were up there on our project, a pretty wild storm blew through and a ship went down. So even today, it's still taken many ships. And it's also, because of its geographical location and because of the countries that borders it, it has been, there's been some very fierce battles fought there throughout the decades, or throughout the centuries. So because of the weather and because of the location and because of the amount of shipping that goes on, they reckon there's over 100,000 wrecks in the Baltic Sea. So from a wreck diving point of view, it's actually, it's quite a unique place to visit. One of the other things about the Baltic is that it freezes over. So because of the amount of snow in winter, so because of the amount of snow and ice, the Baltic is actually has got a very low salinity level. And because of the cold and the low salinity level, this makes for a very unique situation where there's a worm called a ship's worm that's a timber-eating worm. So this worm can't survive in this cold water and low salinity water. So this makes, so the Baltic is one of the few places in the world where this worm cannot survive. So as a result, basically the Baltic Sea becomes like an underwater museum. So any ship that sinks there, all the timber is totally preserved, and that's very unique. So if we lose a ship out here, pretty quickly most of the timbers tend to disappear. So as a result, you've got some very unique conditions. So we'll just have a look at some of these wrecks. So this is a picture of a Dutch trading ship from the 17th century. And this wreck is called the Longbaard, and it's lying in 120 meters. So for those who are not familiar with ships on the water, this is basically such a rare sight to be able to see such incredible detail on timber still perfectly preserved. So these are some beautiful figurines at the masthead of a ship, and down here, is there a pointer on this? Here you can see where the ropes will go through for lifting up the sails, running, the pulleys would run through it, still in situ. It's pretty unique. And this is the photograph of the helm of a 19th century merchant ship. And over here in the corner, you can see these shelving units. If you can make that out, that's where they'll keep all the flags for the ship as we're traversing through the water. So pretty beautiful, very, very perfectly preserved. This is the chart room of a 20th century ship. It actually looks like it's not even underwater, it's so perfectly preserved. And over here, you can see on the doorway, even the latches and the door locks and everything are still in perfect condition. So from a wreck diver's point of view, or from a maritime archaeologist's point of view, the Baltic is a very unique location in the world, pretty special place. So that's a little bit about the wrecks in the Baltic. So we'll have a little bit of a delve into some of the Swedish maritime history. So Sweden was, from the mid-1500s, was trying to become a superpower up in the northern part of Europe. And as part of that, they had a lot of battles in the Baltic Sea. And this is one of the ships that was built. It was built in 1626 to 1628, and a ship called the Vasa. And if you have ever had the opportunity to go to Stockholm, Sweden, then you should go to the museum here, which is the Vasa Museum. So this ship is perfectly preserved in a beautiful museum in Stockholm, and this is pretty much what it looks like today. So a ship of this beauty and of this detail that they surfaced in the 1950s to be able to be in such condition today is very unique. So on the back of the ship here, in the stern, you can see all this beautiful artwork. So this was designed to show power and strength when they were going out into battle. And Vasa was a very unique ship because at the time this was one of the largest shipwrecks in the world at the time. I apologize, one of the largest battleships in the world at the time. And at the time the Swedes were fighting the Danes. And the King of Sweden wanted to get this ship out into the water quickly because it was a sign of power coming out into the water. So he ordered a shipbuilder to speed up the ship construction. And against the shipbuilder's advice, they released the ship a little bit early. And because of the significance of this vessel coming out, the people of Sweden, the people of Stockholm, were lined up along the shorelines of the harbour, and they set this ship out of the dock. And 1,300 meters later, a little gust of wind came along and blew it over, and it sank right in front of all those thousands of people. The ship was built with too much, it was too top heavy, so as a result, a bit of a false start for the Swedes with this one, but nonetheless, a really beautiful ship. And if you ever have the opportunity to go to Sweden and go into Stockholm, you should definitely go and check it out. It's an incredible museum, beautiful ship. A few years later, so this is, they're still fighting. for such a peaceful nation, they had a pretty rough history. So this is a ship called the Cronin, and the Cronin did a little bit better. It actually got to the battlefield. They're still fighting with the Danes, and the admiral ordered hard turn to port, and because the cannon ports were still open, the ship keeled over and pretty much sank right in front of the enemy, and they were like a little bit flabbergasted. So now they're a bit of a pure run, but beautiful vessels, as you can see, they're gorgeous. So in the same war, all attention turned to this wreck here, which is the ship called the Sword. So this was the second largest ship in the fleet at the time, and the Sword was found in 2011. And this ship is it's in the Baltic, but it's in international waters in the Baltic. And the problem with that is if it's not in Swedish waters, then basically it's open to international salvage. And as a result, this one is still kept top secret, the location of this one, and just due to salvaging rights. So they're doing the best to preserve the wrecks. The Cronin, I should have pointed out, that sank in 30 meters of water, and it was discovered in 1970, and pretty much every year since 1970 they go back, the archaeologists go back once a year and they spend a few weeks diving on it, and they've recovered over 30,000 artifacts, and they have it all displayed in a beautiful museum just south of Stockholm. And the stuff that they've pulled off it is incredible, beautiful, lots of treasure, lots of coins, all the cannons, all the artifacts that would have been on board at the time. So incredible maritime history. So if we jump back 100 years, so go back into the 1500s. This is the King of Sweden at the time in 1560, and this is King Eric the 14th. And King Eric the 14th, he became king when he was 27 years of age. So a pretty young guy to have all this power. He's pretty fond of himself, as you can tell. A little bit of jewellery going on there. A bit of a hipster look going on. But King Eric was a little bit crazy, and part of his vision was to try to turn Sweden into a superpower, which was at the time a peaceful, placid country. But he had a vision of taking over all of Scandinavia and moving down into Europe. And as you can see from his little quotes here, he had some pretty unique views on life. It's better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Always a good approach to life. And never was anything great achieved without danger. So Eric had a little bit of a fighting spirit in him, and as a result he had a lot of conflict with his dad and with his brother and with the clergy at the time, who were obviously very high in power along with the royalty. And part of his vision to take over and become a superpower was to build this ship. So this is where we tie into Mars the Magnificent. And his vision with this ship at the time was to try to change shipbuilding construction and make it the biggest battleship in the world. So if you could imagine, back then there were basically the forests were basically, the trees in the forest was being grown with the idea of how to shape ships and ship construction. So he changed shipbuilding construction totally at the time and built the largest ship. And also naval battles at the time were fought essentially similar to what you would see in a pirate movie. So a ship would pull alongside each other. They would essentially jump onto the ship they were attacking and basically go into hand-to-hand combat to take the ship over. But King Eric had a view with this one that he wanted to put this only cannons on board this one, so it was never designed to pull alongside another ship. So his vision in terms of maritime warfare was completely different. So as part of this vision, to make this happen, he had to redesign cannon construction, and most of the cannons he made excuse me, most of the cannons he made were out of bronze. But at the time there wasn't a lot of bronze around, so he ordered his men to go and steal all the church bells from the churches around the country, and so he was losing favoritism. In the end, they dethroned him 8 years later and put him in prison and killed him. Poor guy. But he had fun along the way, so he did a bit of fighting. So with this one, with Mars, when it got onto the battlefield, because of its significance, all attention went onto the ship to try to capture it. And Eventually, one of the ships got close enough and put a cannon onto the deck. The cannon started a fire on the deck, and the fire broke off into the gunpowder room, and actually it blew the bow completely off the deck. And Mars went down in the tragic with 800 men on board and all loss of life. So pretty sad ending. So, on to the search for Mars. So no doubt, obviously, within all of us there's a sense of adventure and a sense of exploration that's kind of instilled in us all as children, and nothing more so than the ocean that can encapture you and give you that sense of adventure. And luckily enough, for some that continues into adulthood, but this brings us into the search. And a friend of mine spent 20 years of his life looking for Mars. He went through a couple of marriages and a few mortgages in the process, but nonetheless, and most of his friends thought he was totally crazy, which he probably is. But as part of the search, he found over 100 virgin shipwrecks at the time. So if you're into wreck diving, you like wreck diving, if you have the opportunity to dive on a wreck for the first time, well, that's pretty much the nemesis you can get to. If you find one, well, then you're one step ahead of that. But to find 100 wrecks in the process of looking for this one ship, most of which he didn't dive on, just purely with the vision of finding this one particular ship. So in 2011, he came across it and discovered the wreck. And at the time, it was pretty much dubbed as one of the most significant maritime discoveries of the 21st century. The result from that was pretty much the majority of maritime archaeologists around the world showed a huge amount of interest in it because of the way the ship had been constructed and because of the challenges, or because of the shipwreck, because of the new fighting techniques that was come as part of the wreck, part of the ship. So in 2012, the first project was set out to go and explore the wreck and to document it. So as part of that, so the wreck is lying in 75 meters in the Baltic, and it's lying in, the water temperature is approximately 2 to 4 degrees on the bottom. And in the summertime, the water temperature gets a little bit warmer on the surface, so it can get up to about 16, which is not too bad. But the problem there then is that there's a huge amount of algae growth on the surface and algae bloom. And as a result, no sunlight gets through and can penetrate through the water. So on the bottom, it's totally pitch black and freezing cold, but the water clarity is pretty good, so the visibility tends to be pretty good. But the challenges associated with documenting a wreck in such challenging conditions means it's very hard to actually bring back anything meaningful, so I guess the public or a non-wreck diver can understand. So at the time, we were lucky enough, we had a lot of support from some pretty wealthy explorers as well at the time that wanted to get involved. So we had access to some of the best technology at the time to help with the discovery. So part of this, I'd like to take you as a little bit of a tour of the wreck. So this is an artist's impression pretty early on in the piece to get a bit of an understanding. So here, this is the stern of the wreck, and it's pretty much, we're looking at the port side, and here is the bow of the wreck. So this is coming back to where the gunpowder room exploded on the bow and essentially blew off the bow of the ship totally. And because of the massive explosion and fire on board, essentially when it sank, it basically is like a mangled mess of giant matchsticks, I suppose is the easiest way to describe it. But it's pretty inaccurate, obviously. So from an archaeological point of view, it's pretty inaccurate to get an understanding of a wreck like this. So one of the goals at the time was to try to create a photo mosaic of the wreck, and this is, at the time, was pretty much groundbreaking in terms of wreck photography. The problem with trying to photograph a wreck is it's very hard for a non-diver or someone to understand what the wreck actually is or what they're looking at. So the challenge in this was to try to create a mosaic. You can see here these lines that are going along. So basically, laid a grid pattern along the bottom of along the wreck to allow the photographer to follow it. So they have some sort of track. Remember, it's pitch black; you can't see a thing. And the lights at the time, as powerful as they were basically not enough to give much vision. But this is an example. So after 1,200 photos and 600 of them stitched together to make this beautiful mosaic here. So it took 3 months to stitch these photographs together to make this picture. And at the time there was no software. This is 2012. There was no real software to be able to pull all this together. So it was basically manual labor of 3 months to make it happen. But gives a beautiful picture of the wreck and an incredible outlay of it. So I'll take you around a little bit here so you can see a bit of it. So in here, this is a capstan. So this would be used for pulling up the anchor. So you can imagine like picturing back to, I guess, the pirate movies where they kind of push a pole through the middle of the capstan and then they walk around in a circle pulling up the anchor. So beautifully preserved in perfect condition. In here you can see some more of the pulleys, similar to what we saw in the earlier photograph of the Dutch ship, where they would pull up all the ropes to lift up the anchor, lift up the sails. Here, this is all chain, which would have held down the ropes to hold the sails in place. Out of the 107 cannons they had on board, you can start to see one in here. Yeah, where are they? Yeah, as you can tell, not easy to see, and then trying to do this in the dark was even a bit more challenging. Okay, so we'll do a little bit of a spin around and a dive. So this is one of the cannon ports here, so you can kind of get a bit of a scale with the diver here of the size of the cannons that were used, and also the size of the timbers on the ship. So the ship was pretty much built for pure battle, and on a lot of the side of the hull you could see where there was cannons being fired from the opposing ships and the indent in the timber, but still didn't penetrate through it. This is a picture of the stern of the ship, and here is where the rudder post is, and as you move around, this is the rudder here on the ground. And this section here, so if we cast your memory back to that beautiful photograph of Vasa and all that incredible artwork on the stern of the ship. That was pretty much where the admiral would hang out, on the stern of the ship. And in most cases, the admiral would have all the jewelry and the coins. So they have all the valuables on board. So when Mars sank, it was believed it went down with 200,000 coins on board. So it raised a lot of interest for a lot of divers around the world wanted to find those. We come back to this piece here. This is a cradle for a cannon, so we'll come back to that in a few minutes. So as part of this, because the wreck is preserved and no penetration into the wreck was allowed, of course Adventures of Tintin got the better of some of us, and we had to go in for a little bit of a look into the stern and see if we could find those coins. But unfortunately, nothing to be found in this part of the wreck. Here's a view of the starboard side, an artist's impression. So this gets a little bit more tricky to understand. So this is some photographs of it, and here you can see some of the cannons sticking out. It gives you a bit of an idea of the darkness here in this photograph. A couple of more nice cannons here, beautiful pictures. The silt here on the ground, so this is up to a foot deep. And it's a very, very fine, white, silty powder. So when you touch it, it'll basically be like milk in the water, so it completely ruin the visibility. But because of the depth of it, about a foot deep or so, and believed to be a lot of artifacts and hidden underneath this. But because it's such a sensitive site, you can't really pull this silt back to check. This is an idea of the scale of the cannons that were used. So beautiful big cannons on board. It's a few church bells gone into making that one. A couple more here. Beautiful cannon as well. Another nice one. So as part of the documentary, you have a video guy, obviously, and then you have a model in the video, and then a number of light divers around to try to illuminate the scene. So there's a lot of coordination going on underwater to try to capture some images. Part of the jobs, I guess, to do was to try to document the size and bring back some of knowledge to the archaeologists who were on the top side, who were interested in what was going on. This is one of my favorite photos here. So you can see in the front of the cannon the flames, or the smoke damage left behind from the flames when it was sinking. It gives a beautiful picture. This was one of the. This guy was a really interesting character, actually. He was an expert brought in, and he specialized on cannons in the 15th and 16th century. So purely interested in that, and wasn't a diver at all, but purely interested in this sort of stuff. So one of the unique things on this particular project was to work with people who, I guess, most of the time you probably wouldn't meet or get to come across, and it adds such value to the diving, because they have a vision and understanding of what they would like to see or what they want to look at, and then they send you down with an idea and some drawings of what to look for. And if you can actually bring back those images, or even bring back some artifacts like this to them, it really creates a very unique bond between I guess individuals that you would never come across in your daily life. So this is very rewarding to work with people like this, and very inspiring. Pretty happy guy, obviously. So coming back to, where is it? Coming back to that picture at the stern of the ship, where is the cradle what the cannon sat into. So we got permission to lift a couple of the cannons. So as a reference, usually when you find a ship in Swedish waters, you're not allowed to touch anything or take anything to the surface. But because of the significance of this one, they were pretty much authorized to lift almost any artifact that they wanted to take up. So they decided to take up one of these cannon cradles here, and then this is the wheels that would sit onto it. So again, if you can kind of picture sort of the pirate movies with the cannon inside the cradle, inside the ship, and it's sticking out of the port of the side of the ship. So it gives a pretty good perspective of it. So what was interesting about this one was that you can see all this kind of black sort of silt and dirt on it, and we were warned not to touch any of it, because apparently there may have been bacteria that was trapped in the silt that would have been around in those days, I guess, from people living on board, and that potentially if you contracted it, then there'd be no way of, and you got sick from it, there'd be nothing to kind of cure you. So no one was touching anything. It was pretty taboo. Another example of a cannon we pulled up. So this one here is pretty much split in two. The cannon just snapped off here. So I give you an idea of the force of the explosion. To snap something like that in two is pretty powerful. So this is half of the actual cannon itself. Of course, on a ship where you have a loss of so many lives, so 800 souls went down with this one. Obviously, there's a lot of conversation about discovering human remains, and images like this here, in the dark, in the cold. Not really sure what you're looking at. It looks like a bit of a skull going on, but they were actually cannonballs, and the cannonballs are made up of cast iron, and some of them, like this one here, are stone cannonballs. So pretty unique and something totally different. And of course, no true wreck story would be complete without some treasure. So here are two of the coins, two of the 200,000 coins reported to be on board. We found a few of them. So we're lucky enough to come across these embedded in the timber. This is an idea of scale. So there are two coins here, actually, traditional style. So this is about this big in diameter, and then this one here on the bottom, this square one. So this is what they call a clipping. and the size of that coin would, and the weight of it would determine the value of it. So once they found out we found some coins, they were pretty happy for us to take those up. The king started to get involved. He's like, yeah, bring up those coins, that'll be good. We're running out of money, so we can sell them off. So in here, so coming back to, so this is the inscription around the coin, and coming back to, so this was something that definitely confirmed it was the wreck, because on a coin like in the States where it says to protect and serve or something, Eric had his own visions God gives to who he wants. So he had a pretty clear vision about who he was in the world and what he wanted from it. So this is actually the King of Sweden here. And yeah, once he found out there was a bit of money to be found, he appeared very quickly on the scene and decided he wanted to get involved. 2 weeks later, he was seen on the Maiden with a new yacht and a whole lot of girls. Yeah, no, it was pretty interesting that he came along and got involved. And this guy here, he was one of the main funders of the project, and he was actually a direct descendant of King Eric. This current king is of a different bloodline in Sweden. But yeah, it's pretty special to have someone like him on board and come out and get involved and show interest in it. A little bit of a video for you to watch.
Legendary ship that was still missing. It's been gone for 447 years before we found it. So a challenge, yes, but also a rewarding one if we would succeed. Little did I know that sent us out on a 20-year journey, an epic search for the shipwrecks. But in hindsight, it's worth every minute spent.
So as you can see, the wreck it's obviously so dark on the wreck, and at the time the lights that we had were pretty much the best lights that money could buy. But the challenge of trying to document the wreck and to, I guess, get some video footage of it was incredibly difficult. And one of the things that's kind of all the in word now at the moment in terms of lighting is how many lumens has a light got. Certainly amongst divers, if it's all about the amount of lumens you have as to determine how cool you are. So at the moment there's like 3,500 lumens or 5,000 lumens or something like that. And in the first year, because it was so dark and we weren't capturing anything, the main sponsor built a light bar which he lowered down from the ship, which was held in position over the wreck. And the light bar had 400,000 lumens of light, and it cost 200,000 euros to build it. So they were sparing no expense, but yeah, that totally changed the whole experience, and pretty much brought a brand new kind of vision of the wreck to reality. But ladies and gentlemen, that's essentially it. That's my presentation for this evening. Thank you very much, and I'm very grateful to have had the opportunity. So thank you.